Are you seeking fulfillment for your life? Do you want freedom from fear? That's why we're here. Welcome to Jesus 101, introducing you to the real Jesus. And now, here's your host, Elizabeth Talbot.
Welcome to Jesus 101. Thank you for joining us for our ongoing series, Chosen, Trusting God's Purpose for My Life. Well, the truth is, all of us have to make that choice if we are to do God's purpose. Once we realize that He has done everything needed for our salvation and that we can have the woohoo of our salvation in our hearts, then He gives us a purpose for Him. But many of us have been given this, I call it limited supply thinking that they had in the first century back in the Mediterranean world. Like there's not enough for everybody. So maybe I can't trust God for today's bread or for tomorrow's. Maybe I should have for a whole week. You know, it has happened to many of us. It took me many decades to get to trust God that He really knows my needs, the needs of my family, the needs of our ministry. You know, everybody is prone to anxiety. Is there enough for everybody? Well, I have bicycles, and I have so many bicycles at home like this because I have a story, and you have heard it before. It's an important story for me because that's when I realized that God has enough. But I questioned Him. I was 4 years old, and I told the story, and I have it in my book, and so everybody gives me bicycles now. And the other day I went to a women's retreat, and they gave me a plant, and inside the plant was this bicycle. And then I have this bicycle, and then I have many other bicycles because the story goes that one time when my dad was the president of a conference in Argentina, which means a whole geographical area, he told my mom and me, he told us if we wanted to go with him to pick up offerings and tithes from this woman who owned a hotel in the mountains of Buenos Aires province. So I was raising for money for a bicycle, and I didn't have a lot of money. And so when we got there, there was all this money on this table that this woman started, appointing for different things. And so I was silent, which was so unusual for me because, as you can see, I talk a lot. But, I was so silent because I sold this money and I was sure some of it was for my bicycle. So I waited and this woman went, well, this is for this educational institution and this is for offering and this is for tithe and this is for, and the table was big and, my eyes I could barely see on top of the table. So I was silent and all of a sudden the money ran out. She was done with all her money, and she has said nothing about me. So I got up with all my lungs and all my strength because there's a moment in which a woman has to do what a woman has to do. And I got up and I yelled, and for my bicycle! And this woman ignored me and didn't give me a cent. Someday I'll have a talk with this woman when I get to heaven. But, it was the first time I felt invisible, that there was enough for everybody, that everybody's needs were being met. This institution, this offering, this church, tithe, this and that, and for my bicycle. Have you ever felt like that? In my family, this became a very famous sentence. Like if my dad wanted more dessert, he would put his plate and say, and for my bicycle. So now everybody gives me bicycles. But the truth is, I have gone to testimony meetings where it sounds like that. Oh, that woman got healed. That marriage got put back together. And you go, and for my bicycle, is there enough for me, God? Well, I learned a lot as the years went by. And one day I decided to do a study. Is there enough for everybody? Or is there only enough for one group of people that look the same and talk the same and believe exactly the same? Or is there enough for all of us? Is this unlimited supply? And that's what we're going to talk about today, of a woman who was needy. And she found out how big the provision of God is. So we're going to welcome once again Pastor Mike Tucker.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
It is good to be here.
And you sound like we're just starting the series and we're getting to the very end.
Absolutely. I've had a blast. It is always fun working with you.
It's fun working with you too, not just because you are funny, but because you're insightful.
Well, I'm glad to hear that I have some insight.
Yeah, you have many insights, and actually, you're very easy to work with. So if anybody wants to hire Mike, he doesn't need
it'll go
any
directly
more.
to my retirement fund.
There you go. You don't need any more work, right?
That's right.
Well, the truth is, today, as we are going to do this whole program, you're going to see a lot of different slides on the screen because we did a whole study, and we're going to be, even though you're going to see our faces, you're going to see a lot of other slides. This is a study that changed my life. It was my master's thesis, and I realized that God really has enough for everybody. Anybody that has a need, anybody that is wondering if God has enough for them, this story will answer it. So I'm excited about it. So we're going to have a mixture of slides, board, and props today.
Absolutely.
Aside from Mike, he's not my prop. He's the person that came to talk.
Came to talk. That's right.
There you go, because you have a lot to say. So let's start by saying that the disciples in Jesus' time were very dense and were lacking understanding.
A whole lot like us.
Yes. And that's why this story is so important for me, because it kind of says, wow, they didn't get it. I don't get it so many times.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, we're going to focus on the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark is believed to be the first gospel that was ever written. It's the shortest, and it's believed to be Peter's version of the gospel.
Yes.
Because you remember John Mark was traveling with Peter, right?
That's right. And it is believed that these are stories that Peter told John Mark, and he was able then to put them down.
Yes.
That's where it came from. So, and that's why the gospel was treated with authority by those who wrote subsequent gospels, because they knew it came from Peter.
Yes, and the truth is, there's many reasons why in academia we believe that, but one of them is that it shows Peter in the worst light.
Yes, that's right.
This gospel is like Peter saying, Mark, you're not going to believe what I did. And Mark said, go on. And he writes the whole thing down.
And the other gospel authors toned that down a bit. They protected Peter a bit, but Peter didn't care.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so one of the first things I want to show you on the screen is the fact that this is divided in two. The gospel is divided in two. And the pivotal verse that divides it in two is chapter 8, verse 31. The first half of we're not going to read it, but the first half of the gospel, everybody's asking, who is this? Who is this? Who is this? Who is this person that can do this and can do that? And the answer is, he is the Son of God. But on 8:31, he reveals that he's going to die. And so 3 passion predictions, we call it, come back to back. 8:31, 9:31, 10:33, where he says, I'm going to die and I'm going to resurrect on the third day. And then the main verse of Mark is 10:45. For the Son of God came to give his life as a ransom for many. Right? So we are going to look at the middle of this, right before this 8:31. So we're going to look at chapters 6 to 8, because Mark has to give the good news. And the good news is such good news that is too big for people to understand. Don't you realize that that's still happening today?
It is still true today, because there are people who when they hear the gospel, will say, well, that's just too good to be true. I remember making a presentation to someone who was on an airplane. He was a Navy SEAL who had killed hundreds of people, and he thought that his sin was so great that God did not want the likes of him in heaven.
Wow.
And I told him that God's grace was sufficient for his need. He said, that's just too good to be true. Wow. I said, it's too good not to be true. It has to be true, and it's true for you.
Yes, and that's what Mark is trying to do. You know, he's trying to bring the good news and show that the scope of Jesus' ministry surpassed any box that people had put God in.
Right. We're still doing that.
We're still doing that. We're still putting little boxes and saying, God is only for this people. Those who dress like this, those who talk like that, those who have a Spanish accent.
Yeah, of course.
Let's go to Mark chapter 6. The way he's going to do that, he's going to do it with something that everybody knew, which was bread. You have to remember that at that time, people worked for their daily bread. And so here, he's going to take the word bread. He has it 22 times in his gospel. 19 of those times are going to be in these 3 chapters, 6 to 8. So he definitely is building a plot with the word bread. And the first thing is going to be the feeding of the 5,000. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to go through all of this, but we're going to go through some key things for each one of the feedings. And the first one is going to be the feeding of the 5,000, and now we are in Jewish territory. And when chapter 6 comes time to feed, we have some key words that we're going to go for. So let's start on verse 36.
All right, this is the disciples speaking to Jesus. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and spend 200 denarii on bread and give them something to eat?
No, not enough.
Not enough.
He said to them,
how many loaves and fishes have you? Go look. And they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish.
Okay, so we're in Jewish territory. So the first feeding that we have, so you're going to see this on screen too, but I'm going to try to put it here, is we're going to have very important numbers that were numbers for the Jewish people. 5, of course, because of the Torah, the law had 5 books. And then we're going to find 12 all the time because they had 12 tribes. So we have 5,000 people being fed. We have 5 loaves of bread. And so Jesus does something. He's acting like Moses. He's telling them to sit down in groups of hundreds and fifties in verse 40, like Moses used to do in the desert. And he does 4 things. So verse 41, please.
And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking upward toward heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before them. And he divided up the 2 fish among them all.
Okay, so here we have 4 verbs, and these 4 verbs are very important. He took the bread, he blessed the bread, he broke the bread, and he gave the bread. So we have 4 verbs, and this is very important. You'll see why in a moment. And then they all ate, and verse 42 uses a word. I don't know what is in your version. They all ate and
were satisfied.
Satisfied. Very important word. They were all satisfied. But we expect this because we are in Jewish territory. We expect Jesus to feed the sheep of Israel. And so we're going to have something left. Verse 43.
And they picked up the 12 baskets full of the broken pieces and also the fish. There were 5,000 men who ate the loaves.
Okay, so we have 5,000 men. We have 5 loaves of bread. We have the 4 verbs that are very important. And they are all satisfied. And they have 12 baskets. Remember the 12 tribes, 1 per tribe. And the word for baskets is a very interesting word in the Greek. It's kophinos. And kophinos was the name of the basket of the Jewish people. I don't have the actual basket, but kophinos was a type of basket that the Jewish people used. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 baskets full of bread for the Jewish people because we have 1 basket per tribe. Perfect. We're all feeling good about ourselves. Israel has been fed. And then Jesus says the weirdest thing. He says, let's go to the other side.
Yeah.
Verse 45.
Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the crowd away.
Yeah, now, they get into a big storm. They all get afraid, and they think, look at the little comment Mark makes on verse 52. In the middle of the storm, it looks like it has nothing to do with anything, but in the middle of the storm, he says, verse 52.
For they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened.
He's like, what insights from the incident of the loaves? What does that have to do with the storm? Well, they have to go to the other side. They have to go to a side that is not Israel. In the middle of this whole thing, we find this little woman. This little woman is going to be the breakthrough in the Gospel of Mark. This is where the disciples are going to say, no way. There's enough for them, not just for our bicycle, but for their bicycle. And so we find, and there's a lot of, like I said, bread and bread and bread and bread and bread. We get to the Syrophoenician woman. Now, this is bad territory. This is Tyre and Sidon. Remember the bad queen that came from there? Jezebel, who had made all of Israel.
That's right. Follow after Baal.
Yeah. And Jesus is going there?
There.
What is Jesus thinking? Right? So we're going to read it, verse 24 to 26.
Jesus got up and went away from there to the region of Tyre. And when he had entered a house, he wanted no one to know of it, yet he could not escape notice. But after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race.
Okay, I got to stop you there. That is a crescendo of demerit. It was a woman.
Yeah.
It was a Gentile.
A Gentile.
But of the Gentiles.
Syrophoenician.
Yeah,
Where's
it's
she
like,
at? Just going downhill.
yeah, a crescendo of demerit. It's like some of the phone calls I get in my answering machine. You are a woman, pastor, and Latino? What are you thinking? What are you thinking? So here we have a woman that the disciples are saying, please, send her away. She's not one of us. There's enough only for our bicycle, but not for her. And Jesus does a riddle. And you know what the topic of the riddle is? Bread. Because that's what we're learning. So
she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter, and he was saying to her, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.
So we have a very big word, the same word of satisfied. We get it here. Same topic. We're still in the same topic.
Bread.
And so Jesus says, but the ones that are satisfied are us, our people, the children of Israel. Not the other people. He's talking in a riddle. And this woman that you think she's not insightful
but she
gets the riddle. Nobody else gets it. The disciples are like, what?
Yeah. 28, but she answered and said to him, yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs.
And Jesus
Just give me
says,
a crumb.
I can't believe that you got it. You realize that there is enough bread, not just for the people of Israel, but for the whole world. And she's saying, hey, they can have their bread first.
Yeah. I just want a crumb. All I need is a crumb.
I just want a little bread.
Yeah.
Right?
Just give me a crumb.
So the next thing we find after this woman breaks the riddle, let's see what Jesus
verse 29,
answers.
And he said to her, because of this answer, the demon has gone out of your daughter.
Yeah.
And going back home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demon having left.
There is enough for her bicycle.
That's right.
And so the next feeding we find is in chapter 8. Now this time is the feeding of the 4,000.
4,000.
And we're no longer in Jewish territory. Oh, I get so excited about all of this. So now 4,000 are being fed. Remember the 4,000 were the four corners of the earth.
Four corners.
The whole world. It means everybody. So we have 4,000 who have nothing to eat. This time there's no sitting in 50s and 100s. None of that because we're no longer in Jewish territory. So verse 5.
Verse 5, it says, and he was asking them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7.
Very interesting. Keep going.
And he directed the people to sit down on the ground, and taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks, broke them, started giving them to the disciples to serve to them, and they served them to the people.
Okay, very good. Now, the number 7 is a very important one, and I'm going to show you, without getting too much off topic, what the 7 meant geographically. Acts is one of the places, but there's many other places where we talk about this. Number 7 were the 7 pagan nations that were in Canaan when Israel came and displaced them. So 7 for them geographically was the number of all the pagan nations that were there before Israel. Look at what Acts 13:19 says, actually. Very specifically, it mentions that. I don't know if you have that. But
I think I do.
Okay.
When he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he distributed their land as an inheritance, all of which took about 450 years.
See, every time you heard the number 7 for the map, it meant all those other people that are not us. And here we have 7 loaves.
And a few fish.
Yes, and we have 4,000, which means all the 4 corners of the earth. And look at what's going to happen next. Oh, I'm getting so excited. So let's continue reading. He takes the 4 verbs.
And they ate.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The 4
he gave
verbs.
thanks.
He gave thanks.
He broke. He gave, and he took the bread first. So we have the 4 verbs again.
And
Continue.
they ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces.
Okay, so the word is there again, satisfied. Now this time, the ones that are satisfied are not in Jewish territory.
No, but it's the 7 nations.
How many
so we got
baskets
7
did they
baskets.
pick up?
7 baskets.
7 baskets, 4,000 men. And we have 7 baskets, we have 7 loaves, and 4,000 men. This is the numbering system of the other people that are not the 5 and 12,
and yet there's bread enough for them as well.
Yes, there's enough.
Not just for Israel, but for all those 7 nations, for anyone else who's not in the nation of Israel.
Yes. Now, I want you to see the baskets. What does your version say on verse 8?
Verse 8, and they ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces.
This word large baskets is a different word for baskets than it was for the Jews. And the word for basket is spuris. See, it's translated large basket because they don't know what to do with it in English, spuris, because it's a whole different word. And it is a different type of baskets. This is the Greek baskets. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 1 basket per pagan nation that was displaced in Canaan. So all we know right now is that there's enough bread for Israel and for everybody else. And the Syrophoenician woman is the one that cracked the riddle.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So just in case somebody didn't get it, Mark does a summary. Only Mark does it. And Jesus says to them on verse 18 all the way to 21. Same chapter. We are in chapter 8 of Mark.
Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up? And they said to him, 12.
Okay, let's stop. 5 loaves for the 5,000. How many kofinos, says the Greek? And 12. They said 12. And then he said, and
when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said to him, 7.
Do you remember for the 4 and for the 7 and then the spuris? Jesus changes the name of the baskets to the Greek ones, the large baskets, and they said 7. And he says, don't you yet understand?
And that's 21. He's saying to them, do you not yet understand?
After that comes a little miracle in 2 steps of this man that saw first like trees that were walking, but didn't see fully. And then he saw fully. See, one of the issues that we have as people is to think that there's only enough for us. And this needy woman breaks the riddle and says, there's no way. The scope of the gospel is much larger.
It's much bigger. All I need is a crumb. You know, she knows there's enough there for her as well. And that's what she's asking for her daughter. And Jesus confirms that. And Mark, in his creation of this gospel, he crafts it to teach that lesson. It's not just for the Jews, it's for everyone.
Yes.
Everyone.
Now, so far, all we know is that there's not enough bread for everybody, but we don't know what the bread means. So Mark is going to keep this mystery of the riddle all the way to the end of the gospel. When Jesus is taking the Last Supper, all of a sudden, after all these feedings, on verse 22, the mystery of this riddle, what the bread meant, is going to be revealed. So we're going to go to Mark 14, verse 22. And remember, for the listener, because most people didn't read, they heard this whole gospel together. They already heard certain words that we're going to see here now. And now they're going to go, wow, that's what we were talking about? Chapter 14, verse 22.
And while they were eating, he took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it and gave it to them and said, Take it, this is my body.
Okay. This is when we
Same
realize
4 verbs.
The 4 verbs and the 4 verbs. Jesus says, okay, now I'm going to tell you what the bread meant. And he took the bread and blessed the bread and broke the bread and gave the bread and said, okay, this is my body. So there's enough for everybody. For your bicycle, for my bicycle, for the kid who spent 20 years in jail, for the woman who committed adultery, for the people that have a slightly different religion than mine, the ones that have a very different religion than mine, those who have green hair and rings in their belly button. I mean,
wearing chains and pants that are too big.
There's enough for everybody.
Everyone. It doesn't matter.
And so the doctrines of the church, of any church, in my denomination, there's 28 doctrines. The 28 doctrines were never meant to be just empty baskets. The doctrines are simply there to carry bread. See,
and the bread
is the body of Christ. So if you are just preaching doctrine for the sake of doctrine and it's empty of Jesus, Jesus is going to tell you, throw that basket away because the reason why the baskets are there is so that Christ may be uplifted for everyone.
You may get the doctrines right, but you're the king of Trivial Pursuit if you don't have Jesus. You got the trivia, but you missed the meat, and that is Jesus Christ. He is the bread of life.
He is the bread of life. You know, when our denomination started, there was a little bit of struggle with this, and I think there's still a struggle on it. One of our founders, her name is Ellen White, had to put it all together because people love doctrine, we love study the scriptures, we love prophecy, and she had to say, look, there's one main truth.
Yeah.
It's not 28 pearls of great price. There's only one, and this is what she wrote, and we're going to put it on the screen for you from one of her earlier books, Gospel Workers. The sacrifice of Christ as an atonement for sin is the great truth around which all other truths cluster. In order to be rightly understood and appreciated, every truth, did you hear that? Every truth in the Word of God, from Genesis to Revelation, must be studied in the light that streams from the cross of Calvary. I present before you the great, grand monument of mercy and regeneration, salvation and redemption, the Son of God uplifted on the cross. And check this out. This is to be the foundation of every discourse given by our ministers. Gospel Workers, page 315. Many times, and I want to apologize in the name of the church, if we have given you empty baskets. I also want to apologize to all of you that we told you, if you don't look like us, if you don't behave like us, there's not enough for your bicycle.
There's not enough for you. Yeah.
And God has challenged me, and I have asked for his forgiveness for the many, many times that I became exclusive. And I thank God for this needy woman who broke the riddle. And she said, oh, they can have the bread. I don't need it all for myself. All I want is a little bit of bread. Do you think there's a little bit for people like us that are in Tyre and Sidon? And Jesus said, I can't believe this woman gets it and my disciples don't get it.
And she did get it.
She did get it.
She got it. And her testimony in the Gospel of Mark now it screams to us. The gospel is for everyone.
Yes, and I am included. You know, if it wasn't for this woman, I wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. Because many stages in my life, I didn't look the same as other people. I didn't talk the same. Not just because I was from another country. I'm talking religion. Mm-hmm. I didn't always see the same as other people saw. One day, I got convinced that there was enough bread for me. Yeah. There was enough for my bicycle. Are you convinced there's enough for your bicycle?
I am absolutely, positively convinced there's enough for me as well.
For everybody's bicycle. Thanks for being here, Mike.
You bet.
And we're going to head to the cross because actually this whole thing that Mark did, see, Mark, being the first gospel, has this incredible responsibility to show the scope of Jesus' ministry. And he chooses the topic of bread. This is a topic that everybody would have known because bread was something that everybody had needed on a daily basis. They worked for their daily bread. And so he builds this whole thing on bread and says, ta-da! Remember, he took the bread and blessed the bread and broke the bread and gave the bread. And guess what? The bread is Jesus Christ who would give his body for all of us so that you may know that you are included. No matter what you look like, no matter what you smell like, no matter what you talk like, if you accept the broken body of Jesus Christ, you are included. Whether it's on this side, on that side, there's enough for everybody's bicycle. And let me tell you, that's good news. This woman had a purpose, and it was to teach us that the scope of Jesus' ministry is more than anyone imagined.